Alrighty, howdy howdy. Welcome back to my tiny corner of the internet. And so I really didn't want to touch on the Charlie Kirk shooting, is because the fact is this is a very politically contentious talking point. But I feel like you kind of have to, if you're in the political sphere. You have to give some 2 cents, because then people are going to question. So you know what? Here's my 2 cents on the Charlie Kirk shooting, okay? And so the thing is that I want to talk about an interesting thing that I've noticed. Okay, I talked about in like the great normification of the internet, how you don't have substantive discourse anymore, and the overall discussion on the internet has declined significantly. Okay, now Charlie Kirk is one of those people who's prided himself his entire life on open discussion, open debate on college campuses. I'm not going to pretend to be a fan of this guy. Obviously, I'm from the more left-wing side of the political aisle. He's always been my opponent, if you want to call it that. But the thing is I've never really paid attention to the guy, and that's really about what it comes down to it. I've never really looked at his arguments. He's never been really captivating. He's been a very milquetoast right-winger, in my opinion. You know, he's just somebody who's a provocateur like Milo Yiannopoulos, Ben Shapiro, and plenty of the other political figures who just go to agitate on college campuses to look for an argument. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I'm still very much on the side of like free speech. I believe in open discussion, not necessarily out of some misguided ideal either, that, you know, that this is some kind of thing that, you know, we have to hold as sacred, but because it's pragmatic to understand that open discussion just overall leads to better ideas. You know, even though I am an elitist, I do think some opinions are better than others, but the thing is the participation, the competition of ideas is obviously far more important than you know, trying to make everybody's ideas equal. And so that's been my position. And so the thing is, when it comes to the silencing of somebody who's varying his opinions, I don't agree with that. I personally think it's reprehensible, not out of a moral thing, but the fact is that everybody's opinion, you know, should be addressed and, you know, attacked or defended, right? You know, that's a part of the discussion. I've talked about a lot of times on my channel that I like it to be more of a discussion rather than, you know, just, oh, everything I say on this channel, you have to 100% agree with me. No, that's not how that works. I don't think it ever works, even in political circles or political parties, for that matter. But I do consider this to be kind of distraughtful. Not necessarily because I'm a politically left person and then, you know, like the entire, you know, section of Mount MAGA is declaring war on the left. I think it's a bit of a LARP, okay? But the thing is that there is not really, it used to be, and I used to be on the libertarian side of the aisle, and 10 years ago it was very common for people to say, especially libertarians, like, I might disagree with you to the ends of the earth, and, you know, we might disagree on these things, but I'll die for your right to speak a difference of opinions. You will never hear that anymore at all these days. That's how bad the discussion has degraded. And it's not necessarily because, you know, oh, people have just, you know, become less tolerable or charitable for no reason. I've talked about plenty of times on this channel about the declining economic circumstances that people are, you know, experiencing. And people, when they have economic declines, you know, these things become less relevant. It's about, you know, people start coming up with, you know, nonsense reasons on why they're suffering. And so they're looking for an excuse to lash out in violence. Any system in decline, people do these sorts of things. You know, I go on some Twitter thread and right-wingers are talking about, oh, this is war against trans people have declared war on, like, you know, normal conservative white men and all that sorts of stuff. And so they're declaring war back and they need to eradicate their existence. This is a war for survival, right? You know, the thing is, these are all post hoc rationalizations for the civilizational decline within Western society. And so the thing is they might blame transgenders. You know, Nick Fuentes is in his audience. They'll blame like third world people. They'll blame people from the third world coming to the first world. And that because third world people exist in the first world, that's the reason why the first world becomes like a third world. Okay. You know, there's a racist assumption on why the standard of living has declined in the West. Okay. Everybody including myself, everybody has their 2 cents on why things are getting worse. Okay. But, you know, and some of them are real. Some of them are like understandable assessments. I'm blaming BlackRock. I blame capitalism. I blame a system that I believe is quite literally, that has no problem like throwing out its workers and replacing them with outsourced cheap labor. You know, I would blame capitalism for that. You know, the right-wingers would blame, you know, immigrants. They would blame minorities, okay? But the thing is everybody is going to find an explanation for the reason that things are getting worse. Okay, Nick Fuentes is in his audience, and most of the people on the political right will basically see, look at the 50s. This is when no black people are around. And therefore, you know, if we just get rid of all the black people and all the trans people, all the gay people, you know, it'll be just like this. Okay? You know, on my channel, I don't personally believe it. I think it's fucking stupid. That's been my 2 cents. Why do you think even in my older videos, people know I'm a woke progressive. I don't hide that fact. I'm on the progressive side of the aisle. Now, sometimes I take a step back to talk about economic issues, and I try to bring both sides of the table, together and have a discussion, is because I think the discussion is far more important than posturing on social politics. That's been my assumption since day one. You can even go watch my earlier debates with the infrared community when they wanted to be the Stalinist golden centers, because they wanted to form an economic alliance that I figured would take off. And, people could kind of put these cultural differences aside and find a way to work together to make their standard of living better. I'm sorry, but that didn't happen. People just, continued making post-hoc rationalizations. For the infrared community, it's the baristas. That's their post-hoc rationalization of the elite, okay? With HSBs and all that sort of stuff, it's transgenders and the woke, whatever. It's a post-hoc rationalization for the fact that they're having a declining standard of living. For, the National Socialists, it's because of, migrants and, third worlders coming into the first world and then making it like a third world. That's what Nick Fuentes says on his show. But everyone is speaking to some degree about a common issue that we all share. We just have wildly different solutions to have this. Hell, even when I was talking about Mentis Wave on my previous videos, he believes that free market capitalism is the solution for corporate monopoly, okay? An anti-competitive behavior bringing down, free market efficiency. He believes that the free market is efficient in producing things to the market and making everyone's lives better, okay? That's his thesis to the problem of the ruling class that we have. Libertarians have their own thesis, okay? Everybody has their own thesis towards this sort of stuff. Okay, and the discussion is very important, is because the fact is that, and I don't want to sound too much like a right-wing libertarian at the moment, but the thing is the discussion and the exchange of ideas is more important, is because how do you come to the truth without exchanging ideas to say, maybe that's not a bad idea? Okay, if you have a shared set of values of things that you want, and everyone's complaining about the same thing, would it not be in the interest of everybody just to sit down and say, this is what I think the solution is, and I think this is what we want to do, okay? So, but the thing is people are not doing that. We have a degradation of discussion in this country. And it's getting worse. It's not getting any better. Okay, now, you have a lot of right-wingers that are talking about creating a database and doxing people who say mean things about Charlie Kirk on the internet, okay? Now, here's the thing, okay? I'm not going to pretend the political right invented that. Doxing and then shaming and then, trying to get people fired from their jobs. I still remember over a decade ago when I still watched Thunderfoot and the new atheist community was a big hot popping thing. And, he got in an argument with the feminists, and the feminists tried to get him, fired from his university. Okay, Thunderfoot. This was well before, the right-wing turn happened. It was the early 2010s. And to a large degree, the left did start this in the West. This idea is I don't like your opinion, so I'm going to try and basically dox you. I'm going to share your name and face to your employer and try to get you fired, okay? The left did, by and large, start this over the last 10 years. Now, is that still the case? No. You have MAGA-peds that are trying to create a database for people who, make edgy memes about Charlie Kirk. And, I think it's called Charlie's Murderers or something like that. They're trying to face shame and do the exact same thing the left has done for years. Even though 10 years ago, a lot of people on the political right would say, I don't agree with what you have to say, but I'll die for your right to say it. Okay? You will never hear anybody say that nowadays. Okay? Now, here's the thing. A lot of the people in the political far right, especially the fascist side of the aisle, were at one point or another libertarians that kind of saw this degradation of the discussion and leftists kind of being uncharitable, okay? And I'm not going to lie, I've had to deal with that too. I'm a leftist, and I've been basically pushed to the corner when it comes to the political left, is because my ideas are unorthodox. I sit in the periphery of the broader left is because my ideas are too different. And sometimes I just get the fluoride stare with people who don't even understand what I'm saying because it's not the tagline, motif or the propaganda talking points the broader left has. I've had that same problem. I understand what you're talking about. I know how insufferable the left is. Now, the thing about it is that I see a lot of people on the right, and even I was talking to a friend about this. They're like, this is the political right's Reichstag moment. They're going to use this to suspend free speech, and they're just going to go after people, and they're going to shut people down. Okay, bet. Here's the thing, okay? We have a declining standard of living in the United States. And I see the writing on the wall. I see the writing on the wall where everybody's talking about, how we need to have a Red Scare 2.0. We need to have a McCarthyism 2.0. We need to stop these evil commies from entering anything because they've infiltrated us so much that we just need to go on purges and just purge people. We need to go full on McCarthyist and all that sort of stuff like they did 75 years ago. Okay? That will not work today. I've said this before on this channel. That will not work today. Okay? If the right wants to have their little fascist chimp out, I can't stop you. You are the political majority. If you want to go about trying to create Nazi Germany 2.0, you're entirely free to do so, but it's not going to go the way you think it is. Okay? It's different even from, like, you know, McCarthyism back in the 50s. It's different than what it was in Weimar Germany, where you're just going to be heckin' destroying heckin' commies or some shit like that, right? Okay? The thing is that 100 years ago, Western civilization and European civilization was at the center of the world. The Industrial Revolution started in the British Empire 300 years ago, 1710 to be precise, okay, with the Newcomen steam engine, which started off as a steam-powered water pump, and it catapulted Western civilization into this developmental difference between what is known as the First World and the Third World, okay? Why, you know, things have been fairly nice within the first world, and then India is the way India is, and why China endured the century of humiliation, and why Europe conquered, okay? And specifically the British empires, France, Spain, Portugal, okay? There is a very real and material reason, historical and material reason, why the Western European powers are ahead. And some people are going to blame colonialism. There's no doubt, no shortage of third worlders who are going to pop up in my comment section because they definitely follow this channel. And, you know, they might throw a fit, say, no, the Industrial Revolution never would have happened in Europe without colonialism. And I don't know if I agree with that talking point. It's because the fact is that did colonialism fuel the agricultural revolution and the Fertile Crescent in 12,000 years ago in the Middle East? That's fucking stupid. You know, why it wasn't because of colonialism of the Americas on why the agricultural revolution started in the Middle East or Eurasia as opposed to the Americas. There was very real concrete material reasons why that happened, and it had nothing to do with colonial system. Even though that's a convenient narrative for the third world that's neither here nor there. But that developmental difference is largely consequential on why Nazi Germany was able to get away with so much, like this super efficient fascist super state, you know, because you really think it was because of cultural values of just, you know, oh, we threw gay people in closets and we made black people sit in the back of the bus. That's the reason why, you know, the European powers industrialized instead of the rest of the world. Let's put things in a historical perspective over the last 5,000 years of where Northern Europeans have been in perspective to the rest of the world. They've been seen as backwaters even as far back to the Roman Empire. You might say, well, that just proves racism. That's neither here nor there, right? But the thing is, that developmental difference, you know, for the vast majority of Northern European history, they were a backwater. Okay, they were not the center of the world. It has nothing to do with race or IQ. It just happened in the first world. With that being said, that's the only reason. It's not because of your trad conservative values and you hating black people and the reason why Western Europe was just better for a period of time. It's because of a critical historical event that happened within the British Empire that catapulted the European powers ahead of the world for the last 500 years, 300 years, actually, not even 500. Because if you go 500 years back, the world's relatively equal, okay? And so the reason why Nazi Germany was able to invade Russia so easily and go upon these conquests, and Europe was able to just push people's doors down and colonize the rest of the world was because of the steam engine, because it was technologically ahead. These were the things that made Western Europeans, you know, more advanced than that. But the thing is that even I say that right now, if I were to basically say, hey, Europeans, America, you know, you're falling behind to the Chinese, if you'd actually give a little bit of credence that the technology that China is making is actually something worthwhile and that we're falling behind, they're going to say, oh, they stole it. The Chinese stole it. The Chinese stole everything that we ever created, including the high-speed rail that we never had, or the thorium nuclear reactors we never produced, that we designed in the 1960s, but we didn't do that is because we wanted to have the same uranium enrichment process pipeline to build weapons. Okay, it's a code. Okay? And so when right-wingers are trying to use this as their Reichstag moment to get people, to throw the evil left in jail so they can bring back their heckin' Tratorino paradise and restore, you know, their old world order and think they're going to build back the 1950s United States, you know, I don't take it very seriously. I'm not even scared about that. If they really want to go on they make this their Reichstag moment and they really want to go back to their heckin' Tratorino stuff, right? You know, have it your way. Okay? Here's the thing. Okay, the rest of the world is moving on without the Western European powers. And I've said this before, okay? If the United States wants to have the fascist chimp out and decide to go completely beast mode, okay? Like it has done historically, what Nazi Germany did, where it invaded other countries, it threw gay people in concentration camps, you know, it did all these stuff and because they deep down believe that it's going to make their civilization better. You know, the rest of the world, it doesn't care. It's going to move on. China, Russia, India, they're forming their own economic trade alliance and they don't give a shit what the United States does. And so they're just going to geopolitically ignore it. They're not going to trade with it. You can see this with the ongoing trade war and taco. Trump always chickens out. Is because the fact is that the United States isn't a major producer of anything anymore. It's largely a service economy. And hell, they're even having a period where they're trying to cannibalize their engineers out of a misplaced sense of an anti-elitism, right? Okay, and they want to be competitive against this. They want to be competitive against this, and they want to basically have a fascist chimp out. With what? The rest of the world, all they have to do is ignore America. Stop sending stuff to America. Stop sending consumer goods, right? If you look at it, Apple is having trouble competing against Chinese products, but America has to ban Chinese products is because it'll undercut American markets, because American products are uncompetitive. That's the problem. Okay, so if the United States wants to have a fascist chimp out, the rest of the world, all it has to do is ignore the United States, stop trading with it, and it'll effectively self-sanction itself, okay? Because at the end of every day, whatever table you come to bargain with, you have to provide something of value to get what you want, okay? I provide you something of value so I can get what I want. But if I just come screaming to the table saying, I'm owed this, and I deserve this, what would you do if I came and say I deserve this to the table? I said, X, Y, and Z, I deserve this, and I'm not going to give you anything of value in return. What are you going to do to me? You're going to ignore me. That's exactly what the United States is doing right now. That's why Trump has chickened out multiple times, is because the fact is we do not have the industrial base or the manufacturing power or even the technology to be competitive with these countries anymore. We need them more than they need us. Any point in time, they can cut off the trade and they can just focus on building alliances with each other. And to some degree, that's already happening. That's why inflation's getting worse. I went to the grocery store and, raw chicken's getting more expensive because we don't produce things. We contently outsourced all our jobs, in the 90s, NAFTA, okay? We had no problem, outsourcing our industry to China, outsourcing our labor to India, and then giving our blue-collar work and construction work, to Mexicans, okay? We contently displace the American worker because the fact is like, I just want to get the lowest dollar because it's all about me, especially the boomer generation. I've seen threads about this. And that's where it's going out. So if the United States wants to have its fascist chimp out and not acknowledge reality for what it is, I can't stop it. It's going to do it regardless. Okay, and if you want to do it against the left because, you're pissed off at it and just conducively destroy the discussion and try and actually figure out the issues of this country, be my guest, okay? I came across a very interesting tweet on Twitter, okay, and it's one of these stupid China posters that I don't know much about them, but they're talking about, it's like, there's not going to be a Nazi America. There's not going to be a Nazi Germany in America. What you're going to have is petty little political tyrants, constant assassinations of people just going at each other's throats over the petty bullshit to play petty politics over one another. And, it's going to be like the Warlord era of China more than it is going to be a fully functional civil war. People are just going to play power politics through the courts, get people fired from their jobs, and, essentially you're going to have no real discussion. You're going to have a few media figures that, because they have the clout to actually, discuss their ideas, dominating the discussion with such a limited pool of ideas is because everybody's too busy doxing each other and they can't actually entertain a halfway decent discussion of different ideas without just becoming rabidly vicious to engage in different ideas. People just can't do that anymore. And so what's going to happen is you're going to only have a couple of central media figures who have enough of an audience and a base to actually insulate themselves from the devastating effects of the power politics that people play. And then you're not going to really have much of a discussion beyond that. And people are going to contentfully cannibalize each other, in whatever misguided sense of vindictiveness that they're going to get out. With the right, it's going to be Trantifa, if you want to call it that. I know that's kind of a slur if you want to call it that, but it is what it is. That's what they're going to call it. They're like, we're going to go after Trantifa. Okay? The left is going to go, they're never going to address the cost of living crisis. They're just going to go after people who are just nominally bigots and then do the exact same thing the right's going to do. And this is going to go ad infinitum. It's not going to turn out into a full civil war. You're just going to have petty tyrants, abusing it through the courts and the legal system to basically get their way. And this has consequences, This is the United States, once again, doing what I said before previously on this channel. It's just going to cannibalize itself. That's what's going to happen. That's what I've told people is like, if you're not a property owner in this country, okay, you might as well just move out, is because there's not really much of a hope for this country. It's because the fact is like you're going to be in a place that's going to be very petty and vindictive. I mean, just go on your average Discord server and tell a different opinion in a chat that has a different opinion. I don't care, conservative or liberal, okay, leftist, right winger, who cares? Just go in there and watch how fast you'll get muted by a mod. Everybody forms their little echo chambers to basically have their ideas peddled and nothing else. And so the people who are going to have their ideas peddled are those who already have large existing audiences who can peddle their ideas, and they're not going to really have much discussion. They're going to have petty little moderators that are going to dox you and go after you to basically shut down a difference of opinion. Okay? None of this stuff matters. And I might make a separate video, talking about like China, about like the whole. I might address Nick Fuentes' argument because I feel like that maybe deserves a video on its own. I don't know. I'm just a guy who's speaking my 2 cents on the internet. If it's not entirely coherent to you, is because I'm not a very good speaker. I'm just somebody who throws my 2 cents into a microphone every once in a while when I feel like it. I'm sorry. It is what it is. I'm not a professional speaker. I'm not a professional podcaster. I'm not like these bigger content creators, where they can spend 24/7 talking into a microphone and a camera. Nor is that my goal. Like I it's just not my cup of tea. I'm just a guy who gives his 2 cents on the internet and lets people throw their 2 cents in my comment section. But that's kind of the thing. You're going to have limited discussions because people are going to be too afraid to give their opinion because they don't want to be dogpiled or harassed or ended up in because essentially it started with Kiwi Farms creating lists on people, reprehensible people, understandable and all that sort of stuff. But nowadays, everybody's just creating little doxing threads after everybody. And that seems to be the go-to thing that everybody wants to do. It's like, I figured out where you live, bro. I'm going to drive by your house and take pictures of your house and then send it back to you. Okay. They'll do shit like that. I was even talking to somebody who had that happen to them, and because their dad was a police officer. This is the breakdown of civil society, the breakdown of the social contract, okay? And I have made it very openly clear on my channel, okay? Is that the thing is that the problem with Western civilization, I'm going to say this phrase, if you are the person who can't say, you know what, I hate you as a person, I don't like you as a person, but you're right, then you're probably a part of the problem of Western civilization. You're probably the problem of society. Is because if you can't say, you're an asshole, but you're right, and because that phrase is not uttered by very many people anymore, right? We're going to get the civilization that we deserve. Is because we cannot entertain a difference of discussion into a productive conversation to actually fix the problems of civilization. I'm willing to talk to anybody, and to a large degree, the left is not. I'm not going to pretend the left is perfect on this, okay? Nick Fuentes has called this out plenty of times, and Nick Fuentes isn't even perfect either. Many of these content creators aren't perfect, right? But the thing is he called out Hassan Piker and said, Hassan Piker will not sit down and have a discussion with Nick Fuentes. It's because the far left is afraid of the ideas of the far right, because of the whole cultural conservatism of the working class. The left will talk about how they care about the working class, but then when it comes to the conservative politics of the working class, how they want closed borders, and they want like cultural conservatism, the left will never entertain that idea, and they'll just kind of blissfully ignore it. And that's why they'll never talk to a far rightist, but a far rightist will talk to a far leftist. I agree. You're right. I'm a progressive woke retard, and I will agree. That is the problem with my side. I will talk to both sides of the aisles because I see the writing on the wall that it doesn't get much better here than from here with the breakdown of the social contract. Okay? I'll tell Fuentes why now. I'll have that discussion, and I'm a woke progressive. I've roasted Wignats plenty of times. In fact, I might even make a dedicated video attacking his idea that, the third world is, third worldists are the reason why Western civilization is declining. And I'll say it, and some Wignats are going to disagree. They're probably going to leave some snide comments. I'm okay with that, because again, that's the importance of open discussion and a disagreement of ideas. That's all there is to it. Right? I'll pick up that plate. I'm a nobody, and I know for a lot, one of the reasons why I'm kind of a micro channel within the left is because I'm willing to talk to the political right. Okay? So here's kind of an interesting thing. With Western civilization kind of declining, okay? And I'm going to throw Nick Fuentes and a lot of the people on the political right who want closed borders a bone is because they might be frothing at the mouth. They're like, oh, libertarians are proven wrong. We've silenced people, and that's why we got to go after the left. Okay, I'm going to throw you a bone after Nick Fuentes went on his rant about how the left will not entertain right-wing ideas. Okay, tell you what. You said in one of your videos, Nick Fuentes, that the left will have that you have no problem with free healthcare. You just want closed borders. You know what? Here's what I'm going to say to that, okay? If you're going to really go down to that route, okay? As a leftist, as somebody who's more the progressive side of the aisle, who does not see the race bullshit, I don't really care about it, okay? Is that you're going to get your way. Not because you scared off all the minorities. Actually, maybe you will scare off all the minorities and they just won't immigrate here more often because of alligator Alcatraz or whatever, right? But the main reason why you might actually get what you want with closed borders and people just not coming to the West is because Western civilization is not the center of the world anymore, okay? Trade relations with China are giving the global south the opportunity to develop their countries, and they will have no reason to come here, okay? You're going to get your way. And you know what? And if you want to basically have more a closed border society, I don't even have a problem with that. Not because of a misplaced sense of racism and hating these people or hating people who are from different countries, just because the fact is that we're already suffering enough economic dire situations already that we really can't just have a bunch of people come in and then, because they've been economically displaced because of American imperialism, because then it just basically stokes like nationalist sentiment and actual racist sentiment that doesn't just end up mixing wells, because the fact is that we're going to get more people like Nick Fuentes just blaming, the third worldists for the reason why there's a declining standard of living. But with that being said, you want closed borders, you'll get it. The United States and Western civilization is falling behind the East. They're developing better trade relationships with the Silk Road, with a bunch of nations. You can call it, CNN and MSNBC can call it slavery or, debt slavery all they want. Nobody buys that bullshit out of the Eurosphere. Okay, nobody buys that out of Western European states. They see it as a better trade relationship is because these countries would not be entering into trade relationships with China if it weren't at least beneficial to them. Because if it wasn't beneficial to them, they would be taking the already uneven trade relations with the Americans, but they're not. That's the truth. The Americans require color revolutions to get governments to align to them. Okay? The Chinese are not doing their equivalent of a color revolution in the countries that are forming better trade relationships with them. Okay? And with this coming, with the development of the global South, more people will have less of a reason to come to the United States, to Western Europe. And eventually, there just won't be a reason to come here. What is you believe that third worldists come to the Western European countries is because you believe we are, the smartest people on earth. The white people are, the greatest thing since sliced bread because they're high IQs, they built beautiful civilizations, and the fucking darkies came in and ruined it all. Okay? I'll tell you what. I'm going to make a bet with you here, Nick Fuentes. Okay? Once these people, leave, and once these people leave is because the fact is, number one, racial tensions and ethnic tensions are getting worse in Western civilization. That's an obvious thing. You can see that with the stabbing on the train cart. You can see this with the CDL driver, the Indian CDL driver. Okay, with that instance. You can see that with just overall in general with every instance. And I just got to pull up the comment section. I'm going to see so many racial stereotypes and smoke detector memes. Okay, you know what? Because of these ethnic tensions, people are already going to be less likely to move here. They're going to be less likely to immigrate here. And the capitalist class is going to get pissed off with that. I'm not going to deny that, right? Okay? They're going to have their countries being developed because they're getting better trade relations with China, and the global South develops. They're going to have even less of a reason to come here. And if you want closed borders, fine. Okay, and I don't even think you're opposed to ending American imperialism and say, you know what, you get your country, we get our country, and then we can separate. There you go. There you go. You get your closed border stuff. And nobody has to be hurt about that. Okay? Because Western civilization is not the center of the world where everybody has to go through Europeans to get their way. And I think this should be a good thing. If Western civilization isn't at the center of the world, then, people don't have to want to come here if they don't want to. The people who do come here, because I don't have a problem with immigration at the end of the day, but I see the vast majority of people having a problem with it. If they really want to come here, they can immigrate and integrate into the culture, and they're not going to do it because of economic reasons, because of American imperialism, like in Europe. It's not going to be any of that stuff. And so when they do come here, they'll at least enjoy the culture. If they don't, they'll have no reason to be here, and they'll just go back to their own countries because they'll be developed too. Okay? The world is returning to the way it was 500 years ago, prior to European colonialism. Because if you look at things prior to European colonialism, the Europeans traded with these states that we're racist to now pretty equally. India, we traded with as equals. With Marco Polo, prior to 500 years ago. Okay, we had the Silk Road, which we actively traded with. Okay, we traded with these countries and these peoples and these kingdoms as equals. Prior to European colonialism. So the racism here, this chapter of European history is coming to an end. And so it is what it is. Now, here's the thing. When I'm speaking about these topics, I'm not specifically speaking on behalf of, American politics and just where the American sentiment is currently. That's what I'm looking out for at the end of the day is, the American sphere of interest and what we can do to have a better discussion to figure out and solve the problems that we have in our own country. Okay? You know what? So if anybody wants to accuse me of being like an open border leftist and say that I just hate white people or some shit and, I just want to have like endless, migration, that's dumb as shit. If you want closed borders, fine. You can have it. You're going to have less immigration anyways is because the world's becoming essentially the way it was prior to European colonization. And so that's the thing. And that's just what it is. But as for the United States, I'm more concerned about the breakdown of open discussion and the exchange of ideas. That's more of the thing I'm concerned about when it comes to the American sphere, the Anglosphere, is just the lack of discussion, the lack of, honesty and transparency and discussion, both on the political left and the political right. So that's the only reason I make videos, is to spark a discussion. Because I think that's pretty important to actually solving solutions in this country, rather than just pointing fingers and blaming some group and saying that this is the reason. Even the capitalists that I typically don't like, right? I don't hate them because they're naturally evil people. I don't believe that, someone's socioeconomic class makes them an inherently, evil person. There's no moralism to this. This is just the fact is, I think the system is bad. I look at reality and I say, okay, maybe we should try something different. And I'm flexible on that. I'm not a hardcore socialist. Okay, I'm perfectly fine in supporting a mixed economy and having, to some degree or level, free market competition, is because to some degree it does work. Libertarians are right in that aspect. I'm willing to admit that. But I also think some things like heavy infrastructure, transit rail, roads, electricity, and any kind of other centralized service probably should be a state-owned enterprise. It should be socially owned by the society as a whole, is because you don't want to have monopolies price gouging people like they're doing with electricity currently, which I might make another video and commentary about America's electrical grid and why prices keep going up, because I saw Hank Green make a midwit video not too long ago. And so I feel like I have a need to actually comment on that, is because there's so much stuff to unravel that I would love to give my 2 cents on that don't fall on either side of the party line, whether it be the political left or the political right. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close off the video. I hope you enjoyed the video, and, I hope you guys have a good day. And, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and, drop a comment if you disagree with anything. Hopefully we can have a good discussion going on here, and we can kind of revive that aspect of American culture that's quickly dwindling away because of the political pettiness of both the left and the right in this country. Y'all have a good day. Peace, peace.